Hey guys, hi, welcome back once again. My name is Vaishali, and having learned quite a few things from and through human interactions, and having pursued my master's in business administration and clinical psychology, I today wish to talk about human consciousness or the spectrum of human consciousness or slash and the evolution of human consciousness. So, what exactly do we mean by human consciousness? In my understanding, it's the awareness that we have, given a particular space and time during the course of our evolution, even within our own lifetime. So, when I began with this topic, I also mentioned the spectrum of human consciousness and also the evolution of human consciousness. And when I include both of those factors, we cannot not include our human evolution as well. And through my understanding, and with an attempt to make it a little more tangible, a little more digestible, a little more comprehensible, I would like to take up a few examples from the few stories that I understand that most of us might have heard or read while we were growing up, during our formative years, during our foundation years, during our childhood. So, two of the stories that I understand that most of us might have heard or might have read when we were growing up was of the ants and the grasshopper. And the other one was that of the rabbit and the tortoise, the race between the rabbit and the tortoise. And the third one is not necessarily a story, but the analogy given that of an eagle. And many a times, even today, we must have come across, we finding pictures or people sharing what it takes to have an eagle's mindset, what it takes to become an eagle, what it takes to soar really high up in the skies, and what it takes to have that laser-like focus, like that of an eagle, what it takes to have that 360-degree vision from the top. So let's consider the first story of the ants and the grasshopper. The symbolic representation, the analogy given through the ants and the grasshopper. And as far as I can understand it, at least today, what it's representing for us, what it's symbolizing for us, is two different worldviews. It's two different worlds that these two different species are inhabiting, the two different environments that these two species grow up in, despite living within the realm of the same world. And though they are living within the realms of the same world, their perception of the same world is very different. Their inhabitation of the same world is very different, and thereby their environment, which kind of shapes them, frames them, is very different. And in my understanding, it's the classic case of nature and nurture. Not nature versus nurture, it's nature and nurture. So when the story talks about these two creatures, they are symbolizing two different creatures, one being naturally a social creature, and the other naturally being a solitary species. One that needs company, cannot stand being alone, and the other who is born to live and die alone. One who lives in a group, in a community, and one who doesn't need a community, one who doesn't function in a community. One that functions in a hierarchy with regards to their position, hierarchy with regards to dominance, hierarchy with regards to submissiveness, and one that doesn't understand the concept of hierarchy. One where there is a leader and thereby followers. One where there is no leader and no follower, or maybe the only leader and its only follower is the grasshopper itself. One that might experience groupism within the group itself, and one that has no concept of groupism or a group itself. One wherein, being the social creatures that ants are, standing outside and thereby becoming outstanding, can at times be perceived as an act of rebellion, while as on the other hand, there is no cause of rebellion because there is nothing to rebel against. There is nothing to rebel for. There is nothing to outstand from. On one hand, with regards to ants, there will exist a concept of trust, of openness, of vulnerability, of caring, and of sharing, of interdependence, of dependency, of relatability to someone, to some ant or the other. And on the other hand, there will also exist the concept of mistrust, of dishonesty, of deception, of comparison, of shame, of guilt, of blame, of inclusion and exclusion with regards to groupism, with regards to one's own biases, of disharmony, of unrelatability, of miscommunication, of disconnection within the social species, of group politics within any species that exists and functions in a group. While as in the world of a solitary creature like the grasshopper, there will be no concept of sharing and caring. There will be no concept of sharing, of nurturing, of consideration, at least for the other, of having trust, openness, vulnerability with the other, because there is no other. With the ants, that's a social creature. There might be a concept of bias, there might be a concept of favoritism. While as with the grasshopper, who's a solitary creature, there might not be any concept of favoritism. Unless, of course, it's its only favorite creature. Because in its world, it's the only creature, for there exists nobody else. For it doesn't belong to any community or a group. Within the community of the ants, they might experience some sort of social conformity, which is where they walk in a line one after the other in small little steps, following each other, being there with each other and for each other, being forward and behind each other. And that concept will not at all exist in the world of the solitary creature, which is the grasshopper. It'll not walk in front or behind or with somebody else, because there is nobody else ahead or behind or to walk with, but rather it'll move in leaps and bounds. It'll not be led by somebody else or be followed by somebody else, but it'll be self-led and self-followed. While the grasshopper on one hand exhibits hyper-independence, because there is no space and place for interdependence. The ants, on the other hand, being a social creature, living in a group and a community, will and does experience dependence and interdependence. While the ants, who are a social creature who live in a community, will take care of its young ones, will take care of its community members. There is no community for a grasshopper, for a solitary creature, to take care of and to be taken care of by as well. It cannot rely on anybody else for support, either physically or emotionally. There will be members of the group within the ant community when it takes birth, during the process of its lifetime, and even during its death. There will be some ant creatures who will be there for that ant or those ants when such events happen. Through the process of birth, through the journey of life, and through the process of death. While as there would be nobody for a solitary creature like the grasshopper, even when it took birth, even when it dies, and even through the journey of its own lifetime. It'll have no concept of companionship. While as the ants, who are a community and a social creature, a group creature, will experience companionship in some form or the other, will experience somebody's company in some form or the other. And in a similar way, if we consider the story of the rabbit and the tortoise, and the race between the two, wherein the tortoise finally wins the race, we'll also see that it's comparing the two species who exhibit and inhabit two different worlds, two extreme worlds. wherein one is a mammal and the other is a reptile, wherein one lives in a group, is a social creature, which is the rabbit, and the other is a reptile, who is also a solitary creature, doesn't live in a group and cannot understand group dynamics. Where one creature in the story is a mammal, gives birth to its young ones, nurtures its young ones, is there for its young ones, takes care of its young ones. The other, who's a solitary creature, the tortoise, just lays hundreds of eggs, and as soon as the eggs are laid, walks away without looking back, without turning back, will not nurture and care for its young ones even before they hatch, will not have any parenting skills as such. The eggs are left to defend for their own selves. The eggs are left to defend for their own selves, to survive on their own, to live on their own, and even to die alone. And thereby, since it's a solitary creature, it has no concept of loneliness. It has the concept of being alone, of living alone, of taking care of itself alone. Will probably also have the concept of trust, of reliability, of dependency, very differently framed when compared to a social creature like the rabbit. The rabbit may have the concept of self-reliability, of self-trust, of self-dependency, but may also have the concept of interdependent trust, of interdependent reliability, at least for a period of time when the going gets tough and the weather gets very tough. And let's consider the third example of that of the eagles. Well, the eagle also is a solitary creature. Of course, it gives birth to its young ones. Of course, it takes care of its young ones for a period of time, exactly like most other mammalian solitary creatures do, like the tiger, like the cheetah. But finally, it runs, it chases, it flies alone. They don't live in a group, they don't function in a group. They have no concept of group work and group dynamics, and probably thereby, to a degree, they don't necessarily need to care about others and what others think, because there is no other in the world of the eagle, in the world of any solitary creature. There very likely is also no concept of abandonment in the world of the solitary creature, because nobody gets abandoned if you're all alone. Nobody feels neglected if you're all alone, if your world is comprised of aloneness. If you're the only creature in your world, there cannot be any concept of neglect, of abandonment, of feeling isolated, of feeling unwanted. And yet, on the other hand, if we consider the other big birds, which are the vultures, who are also just like the eagles, predators, or rather scavenging predators, and not hunting predators like the eagle. We'll also notice that these big birds don't fly as high as the eagle, but they do fly together. They don't hunt alone, but they share their meals together. And just like we discussed about the other social species and the solitary creatures, whether in the story of the ants and the grasshopper, or within the story of the rabbit and the tortoise, the vultures and the eagles inhabit, live in two different worlds. Their experience of the world is very different from each other, and they cannot, naturally cannot, biologically cannot, inhabit each other's world. For if they were to do so, the ants would then need to become the grasshopper, and the grasshopper would then need to become the ants. The rabbit would need to become the tortoise, and the tortoise would need to become the rabbit. The eagle would need to become the vulture and fly low, experience a group setting, while as the vulture would need to become the eagle to fly solo and alone. And in my understanding, these stories tell a lot about human consciousness. These stories, in my understanding, are exactly talking about human consciousness or the spectrum of human consciousness and the evolution of human consciousness. For in my understanding, humans are the only species in the world as of today that are primarily social species, working like ants and working like vultures and working like rabbits in a group dynamic, in a social setting, with all of the parameters of the social dynamics and of the social settings, and yet are the only creatures that can experience solitude, chosen solitude as well, chosen aloneness as well, exactly like the way the grasshoppers do, exactly like the way the eagles do, exactly like the way the tortoise does. We are the only creatures who have the capacity to be compassionate, to be caring, to be nurturing, to be loving, to experience sharing, to experiencing trust, reliability, dependability, vulnerability within our own selves and with others as well. And yet we are also the only creatures on the planet that can also function like a reptile, wherein at times we can turn our own back and walk away from the people that we ourselves gave birth to. We are also the only creatures on the planet who are social and who are mammal, but have also shown the capacity to have no consideration for the others, just like the tortoise. And since we are the only creatures on the planet to experience a blend of both of these worlds, we need to recognize these two worlds that we inhabit within ourselves. We need to recognize the existence of both of those worlds within our consciousness. And we need to understand that we need to integrate and hold and walk on both of those worlds together and alone. We need to understand that both of those enriching perspectives, that both of those worlds exist within all of us. And it is this diverse range, it is this diverse spectrum that makes human consciousness both complex and enriching, and probably to a degree very flexible and mind-bending as well. Let's try and think about that, and I will see you once again the next week. Till then, stay tuned in. And guys, if you do like the contextual content of these videos, please do like, share, and subscribe.